Thanks everybody for being here during our conference called the Caring Conference. I'm thrilled and delighted to introduce you to Nicole, and she's going to help us really make a good choice during caregiving. So Nicole, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm just going to close the chat here. Sorry about that. Okay, so I can't see the chat when I'm sharing my screen, just so everyone's Nicole Dauz, and I'm a self-care advocate, coach, and I love speaking about the courage. And today speaking about the courage to choose hope and happiness. And the reason I believe that it takes courage is these are my two beautiful kids. My son Jordan is 15 and my daughter Summer will be 13 next week. My goodness. And as I said, the challenge with social media, and you look at these pictures and they literally are perfect, picture perfect. And even though Summer has autism and a rare genetic disease, she almost looks like a typical 13-year-old in this photo. And then I flip to my reality. These are not photos that I share on social media out of respect for my daughter, but for context like a presentation like this, I do believe it is important. And it really ties into, it does take courage to choose hope and happiness, because I could let this consume my life. And I always laugh and say, these are just the moments that I've captured on film, because when my daughter's in a full-on meltdown, the first thing I think of is not grabbing the phone. And as she gets older, she gets quite upset. So I'm going to be talking today, there we go, about three main things: identifying, accepting points of worry, shifting from I can't to how can I, and finding meaning in my life. And so I think that really flows beautifully from Candace's presentation and how she ended it, about the importance of focusing on ourselves. And as caregivers, we, regardless of your role and whom you're taking care of, I do believe that what unites us in our experience is the emotions, because there's a finite number of emotions. So as I always say, we've all felt the same anger, resentment, pain, and then the guilt and shame about feeling the resentment and the anger. And of course, there's some joy and happiness sprinkled in there. But a lot of the times, everyone understands that being thrown into the caregiver role, we're experiencing a lot more negative emotions than maybe we thought we would, because we are taking care of a loved one. And this is where the courage part really comes into, choosing hope and happiness. Because for myself, as I said, I know that I have decades ahead of me. So my daughter is 13, and I feel at sometimes very overwhelmed and consumed with worry about what her future will look like. And it can be even paralyzing, but I still have decades and decades and decades ahead of me. And so at the beginning of my journey, I got stuck in, I don't have a choice because my daughter won't change. And as she grows older, I'm learning the challenges. There's new challenges like puberty and menstruation and all of these fun things with a 13-year-old. And I know depending on whom you're caring for, this will all look very different. But the point is we can sometimes trick ourselves. And when I say identifying and accepting those points of worries, it's that so often we don't take the time to really ask ourselves, what is I call the trigger. So, you may be feeling really overwhelmed and resentful and anger, but you haven't really taken the time to check in with yourself. But what's the why? And I'll share with you my points of worry around my daughter are around her safety, because she's a girl and she's just learning to speak. for me, a nonverbal girl is very vulnerable. And so I had at the beginning, especially when she was younger, and I would leave her in the care, like even at a daycare where, yes, there were lots of people there and it was certified and all those things, not being able to ask my daughter what happened to her that day um, kept me up at night. And I knew that I needed to do something to kind of help with that, because it's, as I said, that's when she was 5 years old. And I thought, oh, I'm not going to be able to manage this for 5 more decades. And so part of the courage is, and it's linked to the control of, I, for the moment, can't control this. My daughter's not speaking. And therefore, how can I be kind to myself and identify it? That's a worry, and accept it. But how can I still look for hope and happiness in the everyday life of caregiving for my daughter, or realizing that um, I'll never know what happens when I'm at work, but can I be grateful that I've found a place where my daughter will, that will actually accept my daughter? Can I be grateful that I still get to go to work? And sometimes it's those small shifts, and people often don't relate those with courage. They're like, oh, that's a courageous act. And for me, I'm like, yes, because choosing to, for me, accepting the role as a caregiver was one of the hardest things I had to do, because I had to then accept that my daughter's future would be entirely different than I had envisioned, that our mother-daughter relationship would be entirely different. Um, it's crazy that as a 1-year-old or 2 years old, and having the chief neurologist say your daughter has an intellectual disability and has global development delay, to then think, oh, she's never going to get married. I mean, and that's, I think, part of it is none of this on paper makes sense, but that's okay. Like, there's no right or wrong way, because there are emotions. And that's kind of the acceptance part. And then this is when you say, okay, how can I still choose a path that's moving forward, that's hope and happiness? And that took me about 5 years. So I'm not saying that it's easy, but I think part of it is I didn't necessarily have the resources or the community at the time to kind of have someone put out their hand and say, it will be okay. Have you thought of this? And I know that this is a topic that not all caregivers love to have, because caregiving's hard and it is challenging. And so it's, how can you have a life where both exist? And I always talk about the paradoxes of caregiving. So you could have a day where it's 23 hours of not a lot of fun. But if you can maybe carve out 15, 30 minutes of that day where there's some sort of joy, there's some time for yourself, then for me, that's a successful day. And I appreciate that most caregivers only want to hear this from another caregiver. And that's why I'm a little cheeky when I share this, because I know that I don't want to hear advice the majority of the time from people who aren't caregivers, who people don't understand the emotional toll that caring for another person can have on us. That sense of not having control. And this is shifting to the next part about identifying and accepting points of worry. Shifting from I can't to how can I. Sorry about that. I looked up to see my time. From I can't, and this is linked to control. And so I think that for so many of us, when we become caregivers, it's that sense of control. It's like, oh, someone else is now choosing, consuming so much of our time, and we have no control over it. Their behavior, how they show up, we have no control over it. And I know at the beginning of my journey, I was always telling myself, I can't do things. because of my daughter. And it took me a while to realize how I how that impacted my entire world and how negative and kind of close-minded I became, because I started using my daughter as an excuse for not being able to do things. And then I decided to say, well, instead of saying I can't, what if I were to shift that to how can I? And an example was, I realized that I needed an outlet for my stress. Um, I'm not proud of this, but I did yell at my older son when he was younger. I was so frustrated that I had no control over my daughter, that when my poor son asked for help, and he should have known better because he was neurotypical, that I would get upset at him because it would be awful for me to, yell at my daughter who has an intellectual disability. And so I was like, okay, I need to go to the gym. I need a way to release all of these negative emotions, for the sake of my entire family. But I was in my mind that, but I can't go to the gym. And then it shifted to, how can I? And even that small shift, I mean, the research has shown that if you tell yourself I can't, well, then your brain just kind of like, oh, okay. Like, you've told yourself you can't, we're not even going to look for possibilities. But if you kind of say, but how can I go to the gym? Then, like, so your mind is actually working all of that through, and you may not even realize it. And it may be a couple days, but then all of a sudden an opportunity arises, and then you're like, oh my goodness, I was just thinking of ways to, to either go to the gym, or sometimes it can be, I can't afford that, to how can I make that happen? Or I can't get away for the weekend, or I can't take a trip, or how can I make that happen? And then miraculously, things fall into place. Someone offers to, look after my daughter, et cetera, et cetera. My mom says, oh, I was just thinking I could fly up for the weekend and visit, so you could have some time to yourself. And I think that's a really important example. And even though that's, for me, another act of courage, because you're taking control over your mindset. And it's so easy for us to say, just to stay stuck, but to take the steps of, and it's like almost like dreaming. And that is uncomfortable for me at the beginning of my caregiver journey, because I actually thought I was being punished for all of those bad things I did when I was younger. And because I couldn't understand how this had happened. And that's because I was still in denial. But once you identify your worries and you accept your worries and your role, then all of these small steps allow you to get to a place from, okay, well, now that I've accepted this is my reality, now that I accept that I am a caregiver, and you like, oh, okay, well, I am allowed to be happy. I am allowed, right? So Denise is like, yes, like I am, and this is tied in. Like, still allowed to have a meaningful life, and and the other thing I say is, I am still allowed to have normal family events. And I can still catch myself sometimes like, oh, we can't do that as a family. Like, that's just too much. But I'm like, why not? A perfect example. I wanted a family photo shoot. And and then I was like, oh, how's that going to work? I almost talked myself out of it, but it was really important for me because I do love sharing. I just wanted some nice photos of the kids to share because they've hit puberty, and my son is now taller than I am. He's 6 feet. So we had the photo shoot, and I released all control. I let my son wear whatever he wanted. So check, that's a huge victory because I didn't want any stress. I brushed Summer's hair out. She has long, thick hair. And as soon as I put it up, she just pulled at it. And I was like, you got to let that go. And her face I cleaned her up as best I could. I let her wear what she wanted to wear. None of us really matched, but it didn't matter. So we went for the photo shoot. It was super windy. Summer didn't look at the camera except one picture. But again, it in some sense, it didn't matter because in the end, the photographer got a few pictures. She sent tons but again, that's not her fault. And it's like, okay, I wanted to have a photo shoot happen. I didn't get as many perfect photos, or not perfect, but as many photos as I had wanted that I could use. However, I got like 4 really nice photos of my kids. That's better than 0. And for some, that may seem like a really silly example, but I actually have been processing it all week and really proud of myself because when the kid's dad saw the photo, he's like, I can't believe you let Jordan wear that to the photo shoot. And I was like, oh, but see, I was so proud because I'm like, Jordan loved what he was wearing. And so in the photos, he was comfortable. And he listened to the photographer, and I was so proud of myself. I didn't say boo. I didn't tell him to change his pose. I didn't tell him to smile. So he's really not even smiling in many of the photos. But again, he's still content and happy. And he even said, oh, I guess I should have smiled more when he saw some of the proofs, but he'll know for next time. So these, I think, are just all parts of life where if we just start to roll with them. Personally, I have been part of photo shoots where the mother, for example, when it was for my goddaughter, was so uptight. No one really enjoyed it. And so I was just super conscious of, you just got to let some things slide. And so I think that's a really good example of giving up control. And I have something I love to use called a control audit. And I think this will be really helpful for others if they've never heard of it. And I always ask people, so simple, you just make a table and you're like, things I control and things I cannot control. So just like 2 columns. And the first time I did this exercise, I still laugh because I realized very quickly, oh, sugar, I only control 2 things, my actions and my thoughts. I had put my son under that column. I had put my daughter, and I'm like, actually, I think I can control them, but I actually don't. So literally everything else in my life went under the column of things I can't control. And then I started thinking of all of the things I worry about, all of the things I spend my energy on, and they were all, well, sorry, the majority of them were in that column under the things I can't control. And I was like, this is crazy. And it was such a simple exercise, but I visually needed to see it in order to help me move the marker of releasing control around things. Like I couldn't control that it was windy at the park and cold. I didn't want us to have pictures with our winter jackets on, but we do. My hair is all over the place, and hopefully the photographer can fix some of that. The other things that control are our children, the person from whom you're caring, their behaviors, the decline in their health. We can't control that. So then it comes, oh, but I get to control how I show up. And I can get to control how I think about that. So now with my daughter, I'm much more aware of how I'm responding. So this past week, PMS, it was a really, really rough week. But I'd actually try to make a joke out of it now. And so the joke with her, or what I just say to myself is like, oh, those are the hello hormones. And it's just enough to make me smile. She doesn't understand. And that when her dad gets home, like, oh, the hormones are here. And so we both kind of know I don't need to really characterize Summer's behavior in a negative way, because it's like a code word. We both know, okay, she's like, it's like, woo, because it's like so over the top. It's like, I understand what her autism behavioral characteristics are, but then when the hormones kick in, crocodile tears. She will be sitting in front of me while we're playing, refusing to play with me and then crying, "Mommy, please play." I'm like, oh my goodness. But again, this is where still looking for hope and happiness. And sometimes it's just like, okay, let's just, I've learned to try to ignore her as much as I can and just, I say, do my own thing. And then the find the meaning in the life. This takes a lot of courage because it's twofold. It's the present, but it's also the future. And that's the pooey part, is because we still need to plan for the future, but so much is unknown because I've just let it, I've explained that we control so very little. And so it's almost sitting in the present, realizing, again, even like going back to accepting, is that I'm going to plan with the information that I have. There's still things we can plan for, right? If you can, if you have the resources to, in my case, our registered disability savings plan for my daughter, or already planning down the line, what's going to happen when she ages out of school. Then there's the present of, this is where the real courage comes in. Identifying that the caregiver role is a role. And the finding meaning in the life is, but what are you going to do as the individual? And that takes a lot more courage, because if you're caring for an aging partner and you've been, your relationship has shifted from, has evolved, from, we'll just say husband and wife, to then, caregiver for an aging spouse. And you've kind of got into a routine, we'll just say for 2 years, of not putting yourself first, or giving 100% of the effort because you love this person so dearly, but you realize, oh, I am getting tired. Oh, I do need a break. And then it's like, kind of, there's a little voice, a little courage, like, but it's okay to take some time for yourself. It's okay to hire someone and bring someone into the house to look after him or her. It's okay to go away for the weekend. These are the little voices of courage that sometimes people hear, and it can be the hardest one. And this is why it is so important to find that meaning. And building on the examples that were given, like, what are hobbies that you used to do? What are things you enjoy doing? If it's just going out for walks or reconnecting with friends, or even, when was the last time you visited your grandchildren or saw family? You're still allowed to do all of these things, even though you're a caregiver now. And I think that's part of the takeaway from this is, it's so many people see you now as a caregiver and treat you as a caregiver. It can feel suffocating and it can feel like a burden, but you don't need to have any guilt around that. That's okay. It's just, raising your hand and saying, oh, I'll say, but Nicole's still here. I'm still here. And I do want to have a meaningful life. And then it's finding the courage to do that, even when other people don't understand. Even when people probably don't even understand what your caregiver role looks like. And then they're not going to understand, well, what do you mean? You want to, find meaning for your life or put yourself first, because you could have spent your entire life not putting yourself first, say, partner, parent, employee, sibling, child, like all of these things. And so that's why I think these discussions are so important. It's planting seeds of hope, regardless of where you are in your journey and regardless of how old you are. Everyone deserves hope and happiness in their life. And so I think that, especially depending on your generation, but as women, I think more and more of us are realizing that we do deserve meaningful lives. And that's why I think it takes more courage, because it's almost like breaking a mold and going against the grain. And, but it's still worthwhile. And then, if we can do that in the present moment, then I believe like slowly things will roll out and that the future will be a lot brighter than we anticipated when we first started planning about the future. So that brings an end to my presentation, but I would love to, have people ask questions. I'll stop sharing and see the chat. And if anyone has questions, oh, look at that. There's tons of chat.
And I want to mention that you are giving away your new book. And
yes.
Christine Smith is the winner. So congratulations, Christine.
Okay.
A copy of Nicole's, yes, new book.
Yes, thank you. It was officially launched last night. So it's
That's
like
awesome.
hot off the press.
Burn it hot, burn it hot. I want to mention this morning I had talked about the struggle to really manage this 24/7 caregiving community. I didn't really get into the impact on my finances, but there were times when I did not have any money. And so I almost did not have somewhere to live a few times. And I was in a situation where a friend said, you should live with a friend of mine who's a priest. I was like, okay. So I went to meet with him and I was talking about my struggles. And he said to me, God wants you to be happy. And that reminded me during your presentation of what you were talking about. We can have difficult circumstances, difficult challenges, a difficult life, and we can still find happiness within that difficulty. We are not meant to have an oppressed, suffering full life. We are meant to have happiness as well.
Wow. I did anyone sorry, I just want to take a moment to.
Yep. So you've got lots of insights. So you're welcome to go in there to the chat room and then share any feedback that you have. I think we're going to take our break right now. So Nicole, still feel free to type any answers and comments you'd like to in the chat room.
Okay.
And we'll take our 8-minute break and we'll come back in 8 minutes for our presentation with Deb Halsey. Yeah, and feel free, Nicole, to share your contact information in
Okay.
the chat room too. Yeah, you can share LinkedIn, email, whatever works. Okay, thanks everybody. Thanks, Nicole. That was awesome.
Oh, thank you.